Hello, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the Genesis R&D version 11.7 update overview. My name is Ben, as always, joined by Alicia. We're going to go over this topic today. Do a little background, as we always do before we get into the topic. ESHA was established in 1981 as one of the first nutrition software solutions. Today, we have a large suite of software, including Genesis R&D Food, which we'll look at today, the Genesis Supplements application, food processor, and consulting services. Like I said, we're looking at the Genesis R&D Food application today, which was originally released in 1991, and is designed for product development, formula analysis, menu analysis, reporting, and regulatory compliance. We have two upcoming webinars. The next one, which is going to be July 17th, is going to be an overview or a review of the 2016 nutrition labeling guidelines. So January 1st, 2020, the deadline to comply is on us. So we're going to go over everything that has changed and gone on, and hopefully we have enough time to go through all of that. It's a lot of information, but we'll go through as much as we can there. And obviously we have a lot of information on our website already about all of that too. So if you want to take a look at some information beforehand, take a look at our webinars, our blogs, our other information like that. And then on July 31st, we're going to have a working with proprietary blends in the Genesis Supplements application. So we're going to look through proprietary blends. I think Peter is going to be putting that one on. If you want to register for any of the future webinars or look at the past ones, you can take a look at our webinars page on our website. Please note, as always, this webinar is being recorded. All of our webinars are available on our website, like I just said. If you have any questions about anything, either on topic or off topic, submit those questions in the GoToWebinar control panel now, or as those questions come up, we have people standing by to answer those questions. If we don't get to those questions or it's a bit more of a complex answer, we'll always get back to you afterwards, or you can reach out to us afterwards. But definitely ask those questions as they come up so that we can get them answered as fast as we can. What we're going to cover today, a few UI user interface changes into Genesis, some cosmetic, some functional. We have a bioengineered brief summary, and then we're going to take a look at the attributes function that we've created in Genesis for bioengineered and of course for other functions too, but a lot because of the bioengineered regulations. And then we'll do some questions afterwards. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alicia. She's going to walk through some slides, and then I'll take a look inside of the application to show you some of that information too.
Thanks so much, Ben. We're happy to share with you the latest changes with Genesis R&D Foods version 11.7, and I'm going to jump right in with the UI changes. Like Ben said, he'll show you where to find these in the software after I discuss some of those. So here's a quick list of some of the changes that you'll see in version 11.7. We have updates including new naming and reorganization of my preferences, advanced search, ingredient statement field names, nutrients to view sets, dimensions for Canadian labels, and a few other minor changes. The Preferences button on the ribbon has been renamed as My Preferences. And this is a reminder and an indication that each cloud login and each individual on local installations has the capability to select specific settings when working with Genesis. So you can customize display and other options as your own. Examples of My Preferences are setting search result limits, decimal precision, default label settings, groups to exclude from searches, default groups to which you automatically assign ingredients or recipes when you're creating new records, and many other settings. If you've never looked at the My Preferences options, you might visit that section in your software and see what settings you could use to help you streamline your work. Sometimes we just need to call it what it is. So the More search, which has had that name since very early versions, has been renamed the Advanced search. The Advanced search is used to filter searches for food groups, sections of the database, or any groups that you may have added, or you can perform searches like showing all the recipes that include a specific ingredient. in renaming the advanced search button, some of the other buttons were also rearranged a little. And you can see the slight differences here between 11.7 and the 11.6 versions. The advanced search and new buttons now reside immediately below the search field, and the search button, if you use that, can be found where it's always been up in the ribbon. I know I tend to be a creature of habit, so one of the changes I noticed right away when I was working with a recipe in version 11.7 is that the edit recipe button that used to be located directly below the search field is no longer there. But don't worry, just look to the ribbon and use the edit recipe button that's been there all along. It provides the same functions. It's just we got to retrain our brain a little bit to find it there. Within the ingredient and the recipe records, you can add and edit ingredient statement information. When you choose to edit the ingredient statement fields in the ingredient record, you have two fields for each language. The first is the ingredient statement name, and that's intended for the common and usual name by which the ingredient shall be listed in the ingredient statement on your packaging. The second field is the sub-ingredients field, and that's intended to house additional ingredient detail that shows as parenthetical listing of ingredients in your ingredient statement. The ingredient statement name used to be called the alternate name, and the sub-ingredients field used to be called ingredient statement. In the recipe record, when you're working with the ingredient statement features, you'll see these as English name, English sub-ingredients, French name, French sub-ingredients. You'll see those tabs, and Spanish as well. We hope that you find these more intuitive and the functions of these fields remain the same. We have a previously recorded webinar that offers detail about how to use the ingredient list features if you need to revisit those. We've been mentioning the nutrients to view features more frequently in recent webinars, and this is because it's been a basic set of options since very early versions of Genesis. If you've not worked with the nutrients to view, familiarizing yourself with these options may prove to be very helpful. When you first work with Genesis, you will see the Genesis default set of nutrients, which is about 60 nutrients or so, and you may want to use a different set. Or you may want to create your own custom set of nutrients that you repeatedly populate when adding new ingredients or when reviewing reports outside of the labels, like the multi-column report or the spreadsheet. With version 11.7, we have renamed, reorganized, and introduced new sets of the nutrients to view. You will see the available nutrient sets organized by basics, such as proximates and protein-related sets, the additional common sets like the DRIs and the MyPlates, and then you'll see the labeling sets. As always, we have nutrients to view for US, Canadian, and EU labels. Mexico labeling sets were added in this version, and all of these include mandatory and all nutrients options for the labels. And for the EU label, we added an EU energy set of nutrients. Just as before, you can see the modify option at the top of the list, and that allows you to edit or create from scratch your own custom sets of nutrients to view. And the sets that you've added here will be listed at the top and alphabetically. To help with labeling, Health Canada published a compendium of templates for nutrition facts tables. Included in the compendium are specific dimensions for each type of food label. And we have added these dimensions as the default settings for the Canadian labels. And one place you can view these is in the object properties of the edit label settings. Note that while the default settings start with the compendium-based dimensions, as you work with your labels, these dimensions may change. For instance, if your serving size information is especially descriptive, or you voluntarily list additional nutrients on the label, this will affect the dimensions. And you can also view the dimensions of your working label when you are in the View Label screen, as shown here. In March 2019, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a report of updated DRIs for sodium and potassium. The DRIs, or the Dietary Reference Intakes, consist of nutrient recommendations, adequate intake levels, and upper level tolerances for specific age groups. These are used to base our federal health standards, and they help shape the daily values that are used to calculate the %DV in labeling. Sodium and potassium DRIs were updated for several age groups. For sodium, some of the existing AIs were confirmed by the report. Some were decreased and others were increased. And for potassium, all AIs were decreased. So the amounts of potassium that is deemed adequate for healthy individuals were lowered across the board. In Genesis, you see the DRIs if you use the Compare To option in the recipe settings. When you choose a DRI profile and you compare your recipe to that profile, you can see the recommendation % that the recipe is contributing for a specific age group. This reference would show on reports like the multi-column or the bar graph reports, and it's especially useful if your goal is to address the dietary needs of a specific age group. These DRI revisions did not affect the current labeling standards, so you won't see any changes to the %DV on your labels due to these updates. And at this point, I'll hand it over to Ben to show you what I've discussed so far.
Perfect. Thank you, Alicia. So I'm back in Genesis now. We'll take a look at what she went through. The first thing that you do notice on that opening page inside of Genesis is that we do have that My Preferences change here. So it doesn't just say Preferences, it's My Preferences. Like Alicia said, that's really just to denote that that's individual specific person preferences, not like account-wide preferences or anything like that. As we go into this window, we do notice that it is, it's the same information. We can change our decimal places if we wanted to increase or decrease that. Change our search limit count. I'll go ahead and do that now for myself. Instead of 400 max searches, I'll just do 0 means unlimited, so I can find an infinite amount of items inside of my searches now. And as we go down, you can see things like groups to exclude, which means if you check this box, then just you, since it's my preferences, will exclude any items inside of that group from any searches that you do. So again, the settings here are going to be the same. You're just looking at it from a personal level, calling it My Preferences now. And then the next spot right next to it is the nutrients to view. This is probably my favorite change in this entire update, outside of maybe the attributes because it's a huge piece. But it just looks so much cleaner and nicer, making the names a little bit more friendly to the eye, and then naming them to a bit more of a consistent way so that they're in a good order. So again, most of these sets are pretty much the same as they were before. Added a few new ones, but the naming just looks a lot cleaner. And you can still always create your own as well. We can go up into modify, create our own set, and then it will just add that to the bottom of this list if you create a brand new set. I'll go ahead and open up I have a recipe already open. So I'm going to open up this recipe now. Pull down this window so we can see it. And as Alicia mentioned, we have our advanced search button now instead of the more search. If you actually want to hit, the search button, that's just going to be the eyeglass now. So you got the magnifying glass to actually search in. So if I want to search for milk, I can just hit that button now to search instead of a button that says the word search. And then for the edit recipe area, if we click on the recipe tab at the top, you do have to make sure you're in that tab inside of the ribbon. Then you can click on edit recipe here. If we're on home or if we're on reports, we're not going to see that, but within edit recipe right here, it'll be right there. And then the ingredient statement area as well. And we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but a few things to show inside of the ingredient statement for a recipe now. Instead of showing alternate name and alternate sub-ingredients, it's going to show English name, English sub-ingredients. So a bit more consistent naming across the board. English has the same sort of naming structure for these columns that the other languages do. There's no reason to have them different. So we kind of streamline that across the board. And then if we go ahead and open up an ingredient, I'll just go ahead and open up my tomatoes ingredient. We can now see inside of the ingredient statement section here, it shows ingredient name, sub-ingredients, and it says, again, it says the same thing for each language. So we're adding a bit of consistency to all of the languages instead of having English have kind of its own specific wording for it. I believe this recipe is already set to Canadian. Let's double check that. We'll see a Canadian label here. And like Alicia said, we adjusted some of the sizing of the labels to be exactly what the compendium shows inside of the sizes for those specific label types. If you ever wanted to see the size of your label, if you click on the label itself right here, and mine is, I need to default layout that thing. If you click on the label itself, you can see vertical position. We also see width and height are the bottom here. So you can see it's 5.44 centimeters and 7.6 centimeters. So the exact size is shown right here. It's also shown if we go into edit label and then object properties and expand out the label, we can see the size of the label here too. So this is just going to show in inches. It doesn't show the centimeters and inches, but it will show the specific size. And of course, if we expand out our label, we pull it to spread it out a little bit more, then that size is going to be shown differently. It goes from 4.5 centimeters to 6.5 there. And then the last piece that Alicia had shown, if we go into edit recipe up in the ribbon now and compare to, a lot of times for a lot of Genesis users, they're going to be using a specific label regulation for their compare to, because you're wanting to compare to a US label or a Canadian label. But if you do want to take a look at those DRI values, they are here. You can set them either per specific recipe, or you can have it be the default for all new recipes. If we select male 9 to 13, we could take a look at the spreadsheet report or the multi-column report to see those values as well. If you wanted to set your default for all new recipes, just click set default here and it changes it for the whole thing. So if we hit OK, and now we open up our multi-column report, it shows us percent value for DRI and percent amount recommendation. So 1,988 calories, we're at 5% of our recommendation of calories. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Alicia, and she's going to go through some of the bioengineered new things here, and then we'll take a look at attributes back in Genesis in a few minutes.
All right, thank you, Ben. So bioengineered, Ben, can you advance the slide, please? In December 2018, the USDA announced final rules for bioengineered foods. To address consumer concern and demand to know more about the source of foods they eat, the new regulations called the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard require disclosure of bioengineered content on packaged foods. Bioengineered foods is the preferred phrase to use, where previous discussions center around GMO. I'll give you some very brief highlights of the regulation, but we have a blog post with links to the full rule and other resources that we'll provide in the webinar follow-up materials. So very briefly, bioengineered foods are those that contain detectable genetic material that has been modified through certain lab techniques and cannot be created through conventional breeding or found in nature. The standard is in effect, and manufacturers can voluntarily label foods as bioengineered at this time. Implementation dates are January 1st, 2020 for many food manufacturers, and there is an extended implementation date of January 1st, 2021 for small food manufacturers. According to the USDA, the implementation date is when food manufacturers should prepare to comply with the standard. So this includes reviewing foods and formulas and gathering supporting documentation to comply with the rules. The compliance date for the standard is January 1st, 2022. So this is when foods entering into commerce must be labeled in compliance with the National Bioengineered Foods Disclosure Standard. Exemptions include very small food manufacturers with annual sales receipts of less than 2.5 million, restaurants and similar retail food establishments like cafeterias, food trucks, and airplane food service, highly refined foods with undetectable modified genetic material, and some meats. And disclosure of bioengineered content can be made in the following forms: by statements on the food package, by using the USDA approved symbol like you see on this slide, electronic or digital disclosure with something like a QR code on a package accompanied by instructions for accessing more detail, and instructions to text a specific code to obtain the disclosure information. The USDA provides much more detail of specific conditions that meet the need for disclosure, additional exemption information, and a list of foods that are known to be bioengineered products. And again, we have a blog post that goes into more detail. So within Genesis, we have the attributes feature to incorporate the bioengineered need for labeling, but it can also be used for additional characteristics as ways to tag or characterize your files. So you can do this on the ingredient or the recipe level. And you can, when you enter ingredient attributes, those can carry forward to the recipes that those ingredients are contained in. You will be prompted to set a rule for each attribute, and you can attach documentation, that's supporting documentation that's required as part of this feature set. And you can also migrate some of the existing groups in Genesis to attributes. In Genesis, you'll see these symbols, and the green check mark is an indication that yes, the attribute applies. A red slash circle indicates that no, the attribute does not apply. And you'll see the question marks that indicate the attribute qualification is unknown. When you add an attribute or migrate a group over to the attributes, you will be prompted to assign a rule. The two options that you have would be all items in this food must have the attribute, or at least one item in the food must have the attribute. And a couple examples would be if you were declaring dairy-free, that's that's a situation where all of your ingredients you would want to have dairy-free as the attribute. You need all of your ingredients to be marked as dairy-free in order for the recipe to qualify as dairy-free. So all items in that food must have the dairy-free attribute. On the other side, if you're working with bioengineered, at least one item in the food must have that attribute in most cases. So if one of your ingredients is a bioengineered item, then that would carry forward to the recipe. At least one item is affecting the attribute for the full recipe. So with that, we'll jump back into Genesis and Ben will show you those features.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and close this off. We're going to start with how to create a new attribute or convert over a group into an attribute. So to do that, like a lot of the other things inside of Genesis, you can go to the database tab and modify. And here you can do things like new nutrients, new groups, new allergens. And then again, the new tab here is going to be attributes as well. So for here, I have two attributes currently inside of my database, bioengineered, which as you can see by this star here is denoting that it's ESHA managed, means it's been created by ESHA to be built into the Genesis software. It is the only attribute that you will see when you first start working with attributes in Genesis. Dairy-free is one that I've created for my own personal database. Bioengineered, if I click on it, delete is still grayed out. It's not an option. Dairy-free, I could go in and delete if I wanted to. So it's a user-created one. Like most user-created things, I have control over if I want to remove that or not. To create a new attribute, like I said, there's one of two ways to do it. If I wanted to just do a completely brand new attribute, I can just go to new. Then we have this window pop up here. We give the attribute a name. No official colors, like Alicia had before. And then we have the rule, the attribute rule, which is going to be all items or at least one item. So if we do all items, it means If you have 5 ingredients in your recipe, all 5 have to have that attribute as a check mark for the recipe to be qualify to get that check mark for the recipe, or at least one item. If at least one item is marked as that attribute, then the recipe marked as that attribute. Again, bioengineered is going to be one where if one ingredient is it, the whole recipe is it. Dairy-free, no artificial flavors, gluten-free, things like that are going to be ones where it's at least one, or it's all items. All items have to meet that requirement for it to be that. The other way to create an attribute, go ahead and cancel that and not create the brand new one in my database, is if we go into the groups tab here. So there are a lot of groups that are pre-created inside of Genesis. The ones that are in black are ESHA created, so the ones that ESHA manages. Ones written in blue are ones that are user created. The ability to move a group into, or migrate a group into an attribute, are either the characteristics. These, there should be 6, but I've already converted one or migrated one. I migrated my dairy-free. So dairy-free is normally here. We can migrate any of the characteristics here. You can see that migrate here was lit up. So you can click on any of these, migrate still lit up. If I go into, say, my US recipes or my webinar Canada, migrate is still lit up. But if I click on, say, any of these groups, migrate is grayed out. So you're not allowed to migrate any of the ESHA groups that are not under characteristics. I wanted to point that out fairly firmly. That's the only way you can do it, is either characteristics or user created, of course. If you do convert that over, there's no way to come back. If you migrate a group into an attribute, you can't then migrate an attribute back into a group. So know that it's a one-way road. If you want to do it, there are some additional functions that come with being an attribute over being a group. Certainly pros and cons of both, but it is a one-way road. If you convert it, it's not coming back. Moving out of this window, I'm going to open a new, or open an existing ingredient. I'm just going to open up one of the ingredients that are inside of my recipe. If I right-click on my ingredient here and hit open, it'll open up my ingredient, and I'll minimize my recipe. Inside of the ingredient area, the attribute area is fairly simple. You can select if it applies to the attribute or not, and then you can add some documentation. So bioengineered, my celery is not bioengineered. Dairy-free, it is dairy-free. It meets those. For any new ingredient, it's going to just be set as the question marks by default. So that is unknown. It doesn't know until you tell it otherwise. And then the documentation is uploading any sort of file, Word document, spreadsheet, that sort of stuff. Of course, we already have that sort of functionality in place in Genesis in the attachments field, and that will go into the attachments area too. So if I upload a file into my documentation for attributes, it will go into my attachments. I can go ahead and add one now, or I can select an existing one. So if I hit the plus button, it opens up this window. We can either choose a file, browse, desktop, I can select my projects, spreadsheet, and upload it. Or if I already had attached a file into this ingredient, I could then just select that item as the one that I want to be for that specific attribute. So again, we've got their projects uploaded now. Now if we go into attachments, it's going to show up there as well. We'll go ahead and save that ingredient. Uploading the file takes a little second there. And then going into the recipe level, the thing that you will notice right off the bat is it does show the bioengineered and dairy-free right inside of the ingredient area. You don't have to show that, but it will, I believe, show that by default when you upgrade to version 11.7. If you're in the cloud, you should already be there. If you wanted to change that, either remove it or add it, that's going to be right in the display columns area. So it's been a function for quite a while, but it's not one that I think a lot of people know about. If we right-click inside of our recipe and hit display columns, it'll allow us to adjust either changing the primary columns, things like ESHA code and user code and percent weight, and attributes is going to be there as well, or adding nutrients into that view over here. But again, I've got my attributes shown already. I want it to be shown. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK and keep it there. Inside of the recipe, we also have the attributes button here, and that's really going to show you, if the recipe qualifies to be that attribute or not. As you can see here, I've got bioengineered. I marked my cucumber as bioengineered. I will pause for 1 second and say, this is all fake information. This isn't a real recipe. I have no idea if these cucumbers are bioengineered or not. So don't be too specific on if these items are or aren't. Garlic powder might have some sort of dairy in it. I'm not a food scientist, I'll admit that. But looking in now, I've marked my cucumber as bioengineered. So now we see bioengineered. The recipe as a whole qualifies to be bioengineered. It is bioengineered. Dairy-free, it does not, because dairy-free is an all statement. All of those have to be checked. All but one are. Since one's not, the recipe itself is not dairy-free. There is an override area inside of the attributes window. So if I wanted to say, am I bioengineered? It's not bioengineered. I don't want it to be that anymore. You can override that if you want to, and then just clear it if you wanted to get back to the default. You can also take a look at the regulations right inside of the program for bioengineered. So it shows you just a quick summary of some of the regulations and what it says, if you wanted to take a look at that right inside of the application. And then again, just like inside of an ingredient, you can see the document, or you can add documentation to your item. This is going to be recipe level documentation. The ingredients have their own ingredient level documentation. So if I want to add a file here, again, same sort of functionality, just upload a file or select an existing attachment for this recipe to select to that specific attribute, why it is or isn't. And then to export some of this information, and then we'll take a look at it on the label display as well. To export some of this information, there's two places to go to there. You can either go into the Reports tab and export as text to file, and we can take a look and see, just like all the other functions in the program, groups or notes or preparation method, towards the bottom here, we've got attributes as well. So we can add that into that exported file, whether it's a text file or if we went to file, print to PDF, you'll see the exact same thing, that same exact list of reports that you can add or remove from your exported either PDF or file. And then the last spot, and this is going to be a lot to do with bioengineered. I'm going to go ahead and switch my label to US 2016. Inside of the object properties, there is an attributes area too. If you want to do that, you can say, a lot like all the other pieces, you can show if it's that attribute or not. You can draw a frame around it. And then again, bioengineered has its own functions. If you wanted to show the symbol or show the qualifying text, I'll go ahead and hit OK. And it should draw that up for me. Let's get rid of bilingual so that our US label is a little bit smaller. Let's see if we can find that. There we go. It just moved towards the bottom. So we can see we have qualifying attributes, and it'll give us the list of the attributes that we qualify for. We have the symbol, and then we also have the text as well. So if we wanted to show the text information for, it contains a bioengineered food derived from bioengineering, that sort of information as well. All of that's available as well. We're going to jump back over into the slides now. If you're like me and you feel a little overwhelmed with the new information, the new rules, bioengineering, all that stuff, we have a lot of trainings coming up. I've mentioned it in the last couple of webinars, but I wanted to point it out again. We have a new structure for our training. So our training is now 2 or 3 days, but we don't have professional and advanced specific trainings anymore. The first 2 days of all of our trainings are going to be the professional section, and then the third optional day is the advanced section, or you can just go to the advanced third day if you wanted to as well. We do still have some of those specialized ones like menu report ones for restaurant industry, but The standard Genesis trainings are going to be in that sort of 3-day format where you can add on that 3rd day. And we've got a bunch coming up here. You can go onto our training page on our website if you want to sign up or look at the dates there. And before we get into a few questions, I hope we have a little bit of time. We definitely went a bit longer than I expected to. If you have any questions, reach out to us, give us a call. Our sales team, our support team, our consulting services team, nutrition team, all of us are here to help depending on what sort of question you've got. One of us will be able to help you out. And as we've mentioned a handful of times at least, and we always mention in our webinars, we have so many resources on our website, our LinkedIn page, our blog, our e-newsletter, our e-learning center, all of the webinars on the website. So there's a ton of information there. Feel free to dig into that and then ask questions along the way. With that, I think Alicia's going to ask questions today because I'm going to be answering the majority of them. I'll let her take it away.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks for showing us those attributes features and all the other features. And yes, we had several questions come in, so if you don't mind hanging out a little longer with us, we're just going to go through the ones that came in, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and sending in those questions. We're happy to address those in this setting. So Ben, the first question, can you just repeat what happens when you move a group to the attributes features, and how do I tag an ingredient or recipe after I move the group?
Absolutely. So the migrate group I showed in that modified database window, it's going to just pull all of the information from that group into the attribute. For like the ESHA attributes that are already there, ESHA groups that are already there, if it's marked as part of that group, it's going to mark it as a check inside of the attribute. So it is pulling through that information as well. ESHA ingredients will have a lot of those attributes already tied to them since they already have those groups tied to them. So you're getting a lot of kind of pre-filled data if you're wanting to track those attributes of dairy-free and gluten-free and kosher and vegan, those sorts of things. Like I said before, and I always love to reiterate things, there's no way to come back. So if you do migrate over, a lot of those really just make more sense as an attribute anyway. And so I don't know that you would want to go back, but there is not a way to pull those back. So again, I wanted to point that out one more time.
All right, thanks. Another question. So should I use groups or attributes if I want to create a new way to tag an ingredient?
And that's very situational. Groups don't push up to the recipe level. So if you put a ingredient inside of a group, that recipe won't be tagged as that group as well. So if you're wanting to track, if all of your ingredients are one thing, then I want my recipe to be one thing. Or if one of the items of my recipe is one thing, or my ingredient are one thing, then my recipe is one thing. Attributes are wonderful for that. If you're really wanting to organize items, I want to search for an ingredient and I want to search based on the Eastern region or the fall season that we sell this item specifically in, then that would be more of groups, really, what phase of development your product's in, again, regional or seasonal, all of that is more useful for groups because you don't want that pushing up to the recipe level. And you don't want recipes to pull back from the ingredient level. You want those to be more specific to the ingredient or the recipe. So again, it's very situational. I think once you get your hands on it, you'll be able to see kind of what I say thereof. There'll be a lot of logic to why one item would be a group and why one item would be an attribute.
Perfect, thank you. We'll switch gears a little bit and a couple kind of general maintenance questions. How do I delete a recipe?
Absolutely. Let's go into Genesis and take a look at that. So to delete anything inside of Genesis, you have to go into the database tab and then delete, and then select what type of item you like to delete, whether it's an ingredient, a recipe, composite ingredient, advanced label, menu label. One thing to note here, two things to note here. If you want to delete something, it can't be used in something else. If you want to delete an ingredient and it's used in 20 recipes, you have to make sure that it's not in any recipes anymore because you can't just delete that and get rid of it. And then also, kind of like deleting attributes or moving attributes. And there's really no undo button. If you delete a recipe, you got to make sure that you really want to delete it. If you're wanting to more like archive it or just not have it pop up in your searches, if it's a retired recipe, you usually don't want to delete those items because you want the historical documentation, in which case you can create a group called retired or no longer in production, or however you want to word it, and then add that group to the groups to exclude in the preferences, which we took a look at earlier. That way you are really archiving items. So again, it depends on if it was a mistake and you just want to get rid of it, or you just want to archive it. But certainly, I think Alicia usually cautions err on the side of archiving over deleting, because the FDA likes documentation, the USDA likes documentation. They like to see historical information, and if you get rid of it, there's no way to prove what was going on in the past. So err on the side of caution there.
Thank you. Yes, I do encourage, don't delete unless you know you want to. The next question, can you delete nutrients to view sets?
Yes and no. You can definitely delete your own, and you can create your own, and I'll go through that and take a look at that one more time. So the nutrients to view section here, the ones down to this point here, especially in the cloud, are there. There's not a way to go in and delete them in any way. You can go into modify and create a new set here. If we wanted to do either new and just get a completely blank set, or just edit, add something in here. Maybe I want water and ash inside of this setting, along with my US label mandatory. Let me say save as, and since it says US mandatory with water and ash. Save that, and now again, that item is going to be right at the bottom of our list here. Oh, it's going to be at the top of our list here. We reorganized. And if we go back into modify and save as, we could actually delete that file right from in here. Or if that is a file, if you wanted to take a look at where this line is, if you wanted to find that file on your computer, you could just go and delete that file. So if you want to delete any of the user created ones, they're right there. The preset ones are not in that folder, but the user ones definitely are.
Wonderful, thank you. Is there a way to set decimal places in a couple different settings? So is there a way to set one preference for the number of decimal places that would show up in your ingredient screen versus a different set of decimals that would show up on, say, the multi-column report? So say you wanted ingredient screen to show to four decimal places, multi-column report to report to 2 decimal places. Is that possible?
I'm fairly certain of the answer here, and I'll double check with our support team. I'm 99% sure the answer is no, but it is really easy to switch. If you just go into my preferences, decimal places, I want to bump it up to 4, hit OK. We've got 4 decimal places shown now. If you wanted to bump it back down on your reports or anywhere else, we can just go right back in preferences, swap that back down to 2. So there's not a way to have multiple preferences of decimal places, but again, I switch it in the matter of a couple of seconds. That's partially why, there's not a huge reason to, because it's so easy to switch back and forth those main preferences.
All right, thanks, Ben. One of the great things about this setting, the webinar setting, is we get a lot of wonderful questions and ideas and your input. So we really appreciate these questions and the ideas that come in that can help you work in a smoother manner. I'll take the next question. So it's, will you include the added sugars changes to the label for single ingredient sugar products? And yes, so just last week, this is referring to the FDA guidance for industry that was released on June 17th, and that allows for changes to the labels that can be used on packages of single ingredient sugars like sugar, honey, maple syrup, etc. The FDA released guidance to tell us how these labels should look and what can be done. And again, it pulls in part of the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill sets allowances that these products for the single ingredient sugars, again, we're talking about sugars and honey, maple syrup. So these can leave off the added sugars, includes the certain amount of grams of added sugars. You can leave that line off of the nutrition facts panel, with the exception of the percent DB. So we are working on including those settings for Genesis. So you'll be able to have a modified label based on use of those type of ingredients. And there are changes to the footnotes that are allowed. So look for a blog. I don't think it's published yet, but we will have a blog that discusses this in detail and shows the examples of the labels that can be used. Our development team is working on this, so stay tuned for more developments and new features to come. We'll certainly let you know when those are available. And I think that does it for the questions that we can cover in the time that we have. Oh, one last question. Ben, can you just tell us, how do I switch to the cloud version?
Absolutely. The best way to get that process started is to give our sales team a call. Give us a call. We can go through. We always have special promotions going on for moving over into the cloud. And then once you do move into the cloud, we can easily transfer your data, so you don't have to worry about losing any information or anything like that. We grab your database that's in your installed software currently, bring it right into the cloud, and you can pick up right where you left off, but just with a more agile, easily or automatically updated application that's always backed up. So give our sales team a call or shoot us an email. We can get you some information on that. Like I said, we definitely have a promotion going on right now. If you wanted to move over to that today, we can get you set up with that. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next month, and have a great day.